Jeffrey says, I've got a very strange job. I don't work at Google at all. I barely know what's going on over there. I work at GV, Google Ventures, as he says, which is an independent venture capital arm that's funded by Google. So we invest over $400 million a year into startups. At this point, about 300 startups, and I get to work with those companies across a wide range of industries. We're talking about the companies you'd expect, consumer internet companies like Medium or Slack, as well as all kinds of companies you might not expect. A lot of enterprise businesses, security companies, and a lot of life sciences businesses. Last year we did a considerable amount of our investing in life sciences companies. I get to work with companies like Flatiron Health, a big data oncology company in New York, or Quartet Health, which works on mental health. And it means I get a really nice broad view of the design and entrepreneurial community, kind of where business and design intersect. And every week, I try to leave one day open for office hours. So on Thursdays, I'm generally meeting with 5 or 6 companies in a single day, and I get to hear about their biggest challenges. And what typically happens, say it's a new company that I've never met before. Usually, we'll get together, they'll come into my office, and they look nervous. It's really surprising, right? I get to work with entrepreneurs, heads of product, CEOs. And these are people who are generally very confident in life. They walk into the room, and they know I'm a design partner. They don't know a ton about design, so they walk in, and you can tell. I do a lot of research studies, and so you can tell when people are nervous, and they've got that look. They're sitting back in their chair away from me, arms across the chest, looking a little bit skeptical, like they got invited to the principal's office. And usually the way the meeting typically starts is I'm like, OK, so what's on your mind? And they're like, OK, so we've got these design issues. And it's usually stuff like user interfaces. Say their onboarding flow is inefficient and they think they can make it better. Or brand questions, like, oh, hey, we're been in business for a couple of years, and now we're really thinking about that brand that my cousin made, and maybe we should do something better. They talk about these things that are fairly surface level, and we get into them, and it's really interesting. And then about halfway through the meeting, I usually ask this magic question. I'm like, oh, OK, that was really interesting. Those are great challenges, but what keeps you up at night? And they act that it's really, really funny, because it's really, there really is a pattern to this. They look kind of astonished, like a designer just asked them what keeps them up at night. And then they relax. Arms come down off the chest. They lean forward, arms on the table, and they're like, oh, you wouldn't believe. It's all this stuff. And they start talking about hiring and retaining tech talent. They start talking about building new features and whether or not it's going to piss off their current customers or attract the customers they're hoping it will attract. They talk about moving into new markets, especially we work in Europe, and the European companies, when the thing of coming to America, are like, this is popular in Europe. I just don't know if this is going to translate to the American market. And they talk about things like funding rounds. So they're not talking, these things that are really keeping them up at night are very, very different from the things that they perceive as design problems. And they're shocked that a designer even asks them about them. So I'm genuinely concerned, and I really mean this, I'm genuinely concerned that designers are off on the side doing design while everyone else in the company is doing the business, and that we're working on things that we perceive as important, design stuff. And the rest of the business is sweating bullets about a whole bunch of other issues. And if we're not working on them, we're really leaving ourselves off on the side fairly powerless within an organization. So the way I think about this a lot is like, that magic question. I'll repeat it again. The what keeps you up at night? You wouldn't believe how good that question is when you're talking to people in other parts of your business, whether it's your HR person, your CFO, your head recruiter. Go ask your recruiter what's keeping them up at night, and you'll be shocked what they're talking about. But then you stop and think about it, and you're like, oh, hiring engineers is totally a systems design problem. What perception do engineers have about our business? Where did they learn about us? What do they think of us compared to our competitors? How do we approach them? What's the thing we say to them? What does the job description say, and in what order does it say it? When someone's comparing us to businesses like ours, why are they choosing the competitor instead of us? Why are engineers going to a Facebook instead of to our large startup? This is a systems design problem, and almost no designers are working on it. We're off working on marketing websites and apps and all these things that we perceive as important. But if your number one issue in your business is hiring talent, it just makes sense that design should be going and working on that problem if we've got something to offer. So I've been thinking lately a lot about where I've seen design being really, really effective in businesses. And design done right can be the scientific method for business. All those ideas that are happening in companies, all those things that are keeping people up at night, design can help bring more certainty to those ideas. I think a lot about ideas as inklings. They're floating all around a business. Every time you go around a business and you're talking to people, everybody's got ideas about how to make things better, right? HR's got ideas on how we could be hiring engineers. Engineers have ideas about how we should be hiring engineers. Everybody has ideas on how we could improve our product. But they're really just inklings. They're these little rough-edged, kind of loose ideas that we all argue about in meetings all the time. And there's very, very little certainty about it. It's really hard to pick the good ideas from the bad ideas. And what happens a lot of the time is when you describe an inkling verbally, what comes out of your mouth and what I'm picturing in my head are wildly different things. All those times we've been in stupid meetings where everyone's arguing about what something will look like and how it will work and whether or not how customers will react to it, we're all just bullshitting ourselves because we're describing things in a way that we can't understand each other. We're talking right past each other. And I think design has this superpower that lets us bring those inklings down, give them bones, give them some shape, prototype them, and have them better understood. And now we can start evaluating them in a much more rational way. So the ways we typically talk about hypotheses is we argue about them. So we have this problem where we talk to each other and we're like describing the merits of something. And the worst of all is we're guessing what customers are going to do, right? I've been designing for almost, 21 years. The only thing I've learned is to be wrong faster because I have no idea what the fuck people are going to do when I put something out there. And then, typically, in this new environment we have, we try to launch and measure very, very quickly. The ship early, ship often kind of method, the move fast and break things in Silicon Valley. And the risk with this is that what happens is we typically make our best guess, we build it as quickly as we can, we launch it, and then we measure it, right? This is how the whole iterative process is supposed to work. But the big risk, and I see this all the time in businesses, is that you're really testing one idea. So we've had 4 or 5 ideas when we were sitting around in a meeting room together, but we somehow intellectualized with ourselves and argued quite a bit, and we're like, oh, OK, this is what we're going to try. And usually, it's not the most extreme option, right? Because the really crazy idea, everyone argued about it, and we're like, no, that'll never work, right? So we don't even try it, right? It's always kind of a safe option, because if we're going to launch out in the wild, even to a small group of users, we don't want to fall on our face. And so we're often not really taking a swing for the fences. Then it always takes longer than we think to make it, unless your engineers are way better than the engineers I've ever worked with. And I worked with some great engineers. We're never very good at scheduling how much time it will take. And even if we build something in 2 or 3 weeks, that's a long time and very, very expensive. Once we actually started building the thing, even if we're starting to guess that it might be a shitty idea, we go and launch it anyway, because we feel committed, right? We've got sunk cost. We hope to get really clear data, but it's almost always inconclusive. It's great if you've got a home run or if you completely strike out, but we're usually right in the middle somewhere, and we're arguing about, like, oh, it would be better if we only improved X, and we argue past each other about kind of what the data actually means. And by the time you've launched it, it's almost impossible to bring it back. People, even if 90% of people don't use the feature that we just designed, 10% of people will come with pitchforks for you. And then we're supposed to iterate, and we almost never do, right? Because we move on to the next shiny object. So what I think of when I say design as the scientific method is what we really want to do is shortcut that process. If we can test several ideas in a lab and actually get some measurement around them, we'll at least get directional feedback about which ideas seem to hold merit. And so I think of this as if design can basically recreate the benefits of a lab, we can be very, very effective within a business. I'm going to walk you through kind of 3 levels of labs. I'm going to start, there's one version, the industrial grade lab, which requires a lot of effort and a lot of people. I'm not under no illusions. Even the companies I work with, which are all fancy pants, venture-backed businesses, even there, it's a big ask for a designer just to walk in the door and be like, oh, I want to make serious process change. And everyone's like, F you, like, we're busy here, we're doing stuff. So it's going to be really hard to get buy-in to do a big, heavy process. So I'm going to show you some really lightweight ways of what I think of as lab-type design that you can build up to be very, very effective in a more process-driven approach. So the basement lab, most basic thing. What you want to do is help teams see their own inklings. All those times people are arguing with each other in meetings, if you can give some shape to those ideas so we're actually talking about the same thing, you're being very, very effective. There's a really great quote from one of the Kelly brothers who founded IDEO. He said, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, a prototype's worth 1,000 meetings. Somebody really appreciates that. Nice. I love this quote. I think it's very, very true. And the nice thing is all you need is you. You don't need to get in cahoots with anyone else to actually make this effective. And you need really basic tools, and you don't need to ask anyone's permission. So I'll give you one example. This is a little app I actually made with a friend of mine, Kevin Rose. It's a little intermittent fasting app for people, kind of health nuts. What happened is, and this is so typical, right? So the CEO came to me, and he's like, oh, I've got all these plans, and my engineer doesn't really understand what I'm doing, and I think it's a good idea, but I can't tell. And he brought basically a PRD to me, a product requirements document. And he kind of sketched out some crappy interface that didn't make any sense. And he had a really hard time showing this to anybody and getting buy-in, even his own engineers. And they were all confused, like, well, this will never work. I don't understand it. Like, what do you even mean? And instead of sitting in a meeting and arguing about it for hours, I listened to him. We talked about it for half an hour. And I went back to my desk, and I was like, hey, Kevin, just give me like an hour or two. I just went back to my desk. I took what was basically just text, right? Like oftentimes when we get a PRD, it's just somebody either had just talked out loud about what they think their idea is, or they had sketched down some really crappy, rough version of it. But as a designer, you've got this sleight of hand, this superpower in design that you can make something appear real very, very rapidly. And so I went back to my desk, and I opened up Sketch, and I sketched out what a real interface might look like. And I opened InVision. You can use Marvel, use Flinto, use Framer, whatever freaking tools you like. But the trick is to get it from this kind of inkling, this really rough-edged idea, into what seems like a real interface, get it on a device, and then hand it back to the person. So all those times you're in meetings and someone's spouting off about an idea, if you can just shut your trap, open up your laptop, and start prototyping, you come back to that person, your CEO, your product manager, whoever you sit near, and be like, oh, hey, Joe, I really loved when you were talking in the meeting. This is what I think your idea is. And all of a sudden, the two of you are collaborating about a real thing. All of a sudden, you can take this around and show it to engineers. You can show it to the salespeople in your organization. You can actually start getting feedback, and you're all talking about the same thing. Don't get me wrong, this isn't a great interface. This isn't what we ended up shipping. But this is the start of the conversation. This is like we ran a little experiment in the lab, and now we're all talking about the same thing. I think of this a lot. You hear designers talk a lot about paper prototyping, and then you hear designers, especially really technical designers, I suspect like many of yourselves, who really, really want to get into code and start making something that's like very real. But prototypes are often best in this kind of Goldilocks area, where they're real enough that it feels like the real thing, but you didn't invest so much time in it that you're not willing to throw it out. I think of prototypes very much as throwaway interfaces, something that's good enough that we can all be on the same page, evaluate it, and have the humility to be like, oh, that was a terrible idea, and go throw it in the trash. Or, oh, that's interesting, let's change it in significant ways. So I really think about the basement lab as just spending a few hours on something. Really try to time limit yourself. The more time you give yourself, the more room you have to hang yourself. And then 2 weeks of work later, once we all agreed on the basic ideas, we made a real interface. This fasting app is now used by 120,000 people a week. It's crazy. There's was really neat, just totally an aside, but it was downloaded a zillion times right before Ramadan, something we never really expected. So people are using it for religious fasting too, which is really interesting. The slightly more advanced version of this, what I'm going to call the high school science lab, what you really want to do now is make a prototype like this, but go test it with realistic customers. In the basement prototype, we were still just kind of guessing whether or not customers would actually use it, whether people would function with this thing. Research, to me, I work with a ton of companies every year, and one of my colleagues is a research partner. All he does is user research with portfolio companies. And honestly, it's like our secret weapon. All these companies are running around like chickens with their heads cut off, guessing what customers are going to do. And if you can give them some directional certainty, it's very, very powerful. And so if you can get your prototype in front of customers, you're much more effective. In this case, you need you and a product person usually. Here's an example of this high school lab in action. I work with a company called Managed by Q, which is a New York-based startup. What Q does is they do all those things that people in denim shirts do in your office. They will clean offices. They will hang pictures on the walls. When you need to install a television in a meeting room, they'll send someone in to do it. Hanging light fixtures. All these kind of basic things that keep offices up and running. And huge enterprises have teams of people that do this. They do this for all the small and medium-sized businesses that don't yet have a giant staff. And when I was talking to JT White, so JT, other than having a fancy pants profile photo, JT's their head of design. And he was working with their head of product, this guy named Chris. And Chris was like, listen, JT, if you're going to become our VP of design and really belong in the C-suite in our business, what I really need you to do is to help me see around corners. And I was like, yes, this is how I think design can be so effective in a business. And an example of this is Chris had this challenge on the product team. They were thinking that office managers, who are their prime customer, right? So the person sitting at the desk at the front of the office is usually one ordering services in. They thought office managers would order more services if prices were more transparent and concrete. So you could imagine, I want to hire, put a light fixture into my office. The old system at Q worked like, OK, tell me about where the light's going to go. Do you already own the fixture? Where do you need it installed? And you'd say, answer these questions. You'd submit it. And then it would go off and say, in 24 hours, we'll come back to you with a price quote. If any of you guys have ever worked with a general contractor, that's basically how it works. You're like, oh, here's the parameters of the project. OK, you go back and do some math and then come back to me with a price. That's a really frustrating process, right? It's not like going and buying a widget at Target. You can't just go and buy the damn thing. I'm busy in my life. I just want to buy it. And they were like, I wonder if we could start kind of guessing based on those parameters within a tight enough pricing scheme, we might be able to just give you the price. It would be a lot of work, but maybe we could sell a lot more stuff. And so JT took that idea, and he prototyped it. This is literally one day of work. JT and his design team went, and they're like, well, let's just imagine what this would be like. And they sketch out this interface, and it's about 8 or 9 screens. It's like you log into the app, and then you go through a few questions about installing the light fixture. You take a picture of where it'll go so they can know what type of material's in the ceiling. And then they give you a guaranteed price. This is all kind of magic, waving your hands product work, right? They're assuming that they can do a bunch of things. But the way Chris was looking at it, the product manager, he was thinking, well, if even this magic version doesn't work with office managers, well, why the fuck should we waste months trying to figure out if we can logistically even make this function? Right? So he wanted to measure twice before he spent all the time actually cutting and making the whole system. It's such a huge amount of engineering effort. It's a huge amount of operational effort. It was one of those inklings that was keeping him up at night. He's like, shit, this seems like such a big opportunity, but it's such a huge investment of time and resources to actually pursue it. Well, let's pretend it exists and see if it, even if it did exist, if it would be successful. So they made this thing. And the really cool part is JT arranged for 5 office managers to come in on Friday. So on Monday, Chris gave him the challenge. He prototyped it in a day. And on Friday, 5 people came in. But not just anybody. This isn't like coffee shop testing. If you read stuff like the Lean Startup, they'll encourage you to go out and just go to Starbucks and get some people using your software. That's OK. It's better than sitting in your office pontificating. But the best thing to do is actually go get realistic people. And so they brought in actual office managers who actually understood Q already, because that was at least one place to start. And we're talking to them basically about whether or not this system worked for them. They did one-on-one user studies. So this isn't rocket science, pretty simple studies. This is Michael, my research partner, with a study participant. No fancy stuff, no one-way mirrors. Did you guys ever use one-way mirrors? Seriously, everybody watches cop shows. So yeah, somebody's got their hand up. Everybody watches cop shows. They know someone's back there. It's freaking creepy. We just do this in a meeting room with a little bit of basic equipment. Usually a device, if we're doing a mobile thing, we use a document scanner over the top of the device. But if you're using a laptop, you don't even need those things. And we use GoToMeeting and a laptop. We keep it really simple. In this case, it turned out that office managers were like, oh, finally, I can order this way. I've been meaning to get a bunch of stuff done in my office, but I wasn't doing it because it's too much of a pain in the butt. And if I can't give a guaranteed price, I can't get my CFO to sign off on actually doing the work. And they're like, oh, OK, cool. And so they invested tons of time in actually making this work and drove up their business significantly. It's a great investment of their time. So the industrial grade science lab is both of these things I was just talking about on steroids. So what you do is create the prototype through group collaboration, so actually working with a bunch of people, not you off in the corner doing design work. Real design work at real organizations gets done in mixed groups. It's almost never some genius designers off on the side. And then going and testing it with customers. We wrote a whole bunch of articles about this at gv.com/sprint, which are all out there for free. We call this a design sprint. And we even wrote a book about it. If you want to pick up a hardcover book. I'm going to give you an example of a sprint we did with a company called Savioke, which is a company in our portfolio. So Savioke is a company that makes autonomous robots for the service industry. They looked at this issue. So this is a hotel lobby. Whenever you've been in a hotel, I bet it never looked like this. This is what a hotel lobby looks like at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when no one's there. In the morning and in the evening, everything's crazy down there. When I was checking in last night, I waited for 20 minutes just to be able to get the key card to my room. And at that time of day, it's very hard for the hotel to offer quality service in the rest of the building, right? So you've just checked in, and you forgot your toothbrush. And you're like, I just got off an overnight flight. I'm up in my room. I forgot my toothbrush. You call down to the desk, and they're off their feet busy. It takes them 45 minutes to get you a toothbrush, and you're sitting there with furry mouth for an hour. And this was an issue that this company thought they could solve. And of course, like any good Bay Area company, they were like, do you want to solve that? Robots. So they made this robot called Relay. And Relay has a compartment in the top that you can put stuff in. It's about waist height. And it can operate autonomously around a hotel. So it can just wander its way around the hotel and come to your room and deliver something like a towel or a toothbrush. And when Savioke came to my team, they were about a month and a half from deployment at their first hotel, the Aloft Hotel in Cupertino. And they were like, oh, guys, we really want to do a design sprint. There's a bunch of stuff that's keeping us up at night. And we're like, cool, I'll work with robots. That sounds awesome. So they came into our office. And the first thing we did is we gathered a team. So this is the biggest difference between a design sprint and these kind of the simpler lab systems I was talking about earlier. You have the people you'd expect. You've got designers. You've got one of the guys had an audio technician background. You have a roboticist and an engineer. But you also had these people you wouldn't always expect to be involved in ideation and prototyping. You had an ambassador. So Izumi, the woman on the left, she spent all of her time basically doing customer service with hotels. And she was the one interfacing with the actual people in the hotels who'd be operating the systems and teaching them how it would work. We had Steve Cousins, who's the CEO of Savioke, longtime roboticist. And really importantly, we had their operating officer, who was really worried about the business of how they would actually succeed as a company. And we asked them, OK, what are the hypotheses we want to test? High risk or high reward things. The things that are down the middle that you're probably going to do anyway, we don't need to test them so much. You'll be able to get that data in the wild. What we really want to do is test the things that are really keeping you up at night. And in their case, it was they were about to launch into hotels, and they were sure that they could actually get the thing out there, and that it would operate around the hotel. So in their own office, they could test how it would work with elevators. They could test, would it run over people's feet, and they could make a safe device. They could get it to open and close the door. So it could do all the basic functions. But what they were really worried about is how people would actually react to the thing. Seeing a robot just wandering around in the wild is not something we're used to yet. And so what we did is on Monday, before we really even knew what we were going to do, we created time pressure. And what we did is we scheduled 5 customer interviews. So it's on Monday. We have no idea really what problem we're solving. We really no idea how we're going to solve it. We're already scheduling 5 people to come in on Friday. Scares the pants off you. Part of the reason people ship early and ship often and do agile methodology is to light a fire under your butt to get stuff done fast and to force you into making quick decisions. And we like recreating that pressure in a sprint. So in this case, we're very particular about who we want to recruit. We didn't want just anybody off the street. If you're a homebody who never stays in a hotel, you have no idea how you would, what you would do if you forgot something when you went to the hotel. We also don't want road warriors. Road warriors never forget anything. They leave a bag packed all the time. I travel just enough that I basically have a suitcase that's just constantly packed with toiletries and my basics. I just pack that stuff up and head off to a conference like this, and I'm fine. We wanted somebody just in the middle, somebody who travels, at least 5 or 6 times a year, mostly on vacation, and will forget stuff all the time. They're right in our sweet spot. So in this case, and this is what we often do, we listed on Craigslist, and we said, hey, we're doing a study. If you'd like to make $100 or $150 and do a study with us, that'd be great. And then we get them to fill out a form. This is a really important part. There's a bunch of questions buried in the form. We use this as a screener to make sure that we get the people we're looking for. So we ask these kind of sideways questions about travel and a whole bunch of things, so they can't know kind of what we're hunting for. And then we're selecting out customers who travel the right amount for us. Then we find the right challenge. So we sketched out the entire map. So what happens? What are all the times people actually interact with a robot? If your biggest thing that's keeping you up at night is how people will react when a robot just randomly comes up to them, there's a whole bunch of places that could happen. You walk into the lobby of the hotel for the first time, and there's a robot just running an errand, and you're just like, whoa, what just happened? That's one opportunity. One of the big risks was when it gets in the elevator with you. So it's actually riding in the elevator with humans, right? Which is, all right, another little aside, but it's kind of cool. If you think an elevator is a bit like a basic robot, right? And in every room, like in this building, and the elevators have a server room off to the side. There's literally a rack of servers like you'd expect in a normal server room. And what Savioke does is they put another rack into the server, and the Savioke robot talks to that server talks to the elevator. And so while the Savioke robot gets its instructions, and it's like, oh, I'm 20 seconds away from the elevator, it's calling over to the elevator and being like, come down for me, I need to go to 5. The elevator comes down, it slides in to the back of the elevator, it goes up to 5 and then drives out. But we have all these human motions, right, that we indicate that we need to get off an elevator. We can tap somebody on the shoulder, we can make a noise, we can cough, we can kind of shuffle. We all do these things. You kind of jiggle your luggage. A robot can't do any of these things, and it certainly can't touch you. We're very, very worried about hurting people. So that was one risk that we could have tackled. But in the end, what we decided to focus in on was that moment it shows up to your room. What does someone think? Because the biggest function for us was to know how satisfied somebody is with the service. And the really, really interesting part is that when we had everybody in the room on that Monday, and we're asking kind of what their biggest challenges are, their COO looked at us and he goes, listen, guys, if we're going to be successful as a business, what we really need to do is improve the guest satisfaction index. And we're all like, what? Like, what's a GSI, man? Turns out guest satisfaction index is the main factor that hotels use to benchmark themselves against each other. How happy are the guests in our hotel? And they are tracking this on a weekly basis and making sure that within their own hotel that they're growing the guest satisfaction index, and that between hotels within a chain that they're tracking well, and that even among their peers that they're within a high percentile on the guest satisfaction index. So if that's your most important number as a hotelier, if you're building robots for the hotel industry, your golden standard is to increase the guest satisfaction index. If you can increase the guest satisfaction index, you can drive up deployment of your robots significantly. Super useful information we never would have got if it was just a bunch of designers and engineers sitting around trying to come up with ideas. And we were like, oh, OK, the moment we could really drive up the guest satisfaction index is at that moment that you got service. Right? And we're like, oh, if we could make that delight not just functional. They knew they could actually create the function of delivering the towel or the toothbrush to you. But if we could drive that up and actually be delightful, we might have a real piece of gold on our hands. So the big question then is, if we are going to improve the guest satisfaction index, how should the robot actually behave? How can we actually delight people with a robot? The problem is the Savioke robot, which you call Relay, isn't Wall-E. It's not C-3PO. It's not R2-D2. One of the big issues in robotics in the real world is that people who have never experienced a robot have strong expectations of what a robot can do. We've all watched science fiction, and robots are amazing. Wall-E looks like a simple industrial robot. Wall-E is wildly complicated. Articulating arms, expressive eyes, can understand English language. It's very sophisticated. The Savioke robot, on the other hand, doesn't even have a microphone. It's not listening to you, let alone understanding you. All those times you've yelled at your Siri or your Google Home, it's because you expect that it can understand you, but it just can't. We're not very good at that stuff yet. So we thought, can we delight people without setting their expectations too high of what the robot can actually do, without creating a cognitive dissonance with the robot? So we brought in the robot into the office. We snuck it in under a blanket because they didn't want Google to know anything about it. Drove it into our office, and of course we took a selfie with it right away. We're very excited. And so one of the big risks that have been keeping them up at night, and I know this might sound a little silly, is whether or not to give the robot personality. They had debated this. This is that thing I was talking about, where in meetings they had debated this and gone back and forth and tried to imagine what it would mean for the robot to have personality. And when they brought it to our office a month and a half from launching, the robot just had a text interface that was very functional. It would say exactly what the robot wanted you to do. But they thought if we could give it personality, we might be able to drive up that guest satisfaction index. But we really might, if we give it personality, we might have people abuse the robot. It's really a thing. I swear to God, when you talk to roboticists, robot abuse is a problem. They were worried you'd talk to the robot and be like, thanks, robot. And the robot would be like, just staring at you and be like, fucking robot doesn't listen to me. And then you'd knock it over. Maybe not that extreme, but that you'd be frustrated with it, and it wouldn't actually be delightful. All right, so what we did is we found more than one solution. On Tuesday, we spend the whole day sketching down ideas. We do almost no group brainstorming. Group brainstorms are a waste of time. The strongest voice always wins. And the biggest problem is, in your company, think about how many times you've actually had 3 hours to sit down and articulate an idea. Almost always we're in situations where we're shouting out ideas or that we're running between meetings, and we never have time to be like, oh, if I was presented with this problem, say of giving a robot personality and creating a delightful experience at the door, what would I do? You never have time to really think it through and articulate a fully formed idea. So we go through a bunch of exercises where we start very low fidelity, and then we try kind of go wide and then go narrow. All of this is described in those free articles online if you want to read them. But the nice thing is it's like a library atmosphere, and we're all sketching down, and by the end of the day, we all have made little sketches like this. It's like a little cartoon. This happens, and then it results in this, and the final result is X. Interfaces are almost never one screen at a time. In this case in particular, it was a lot about how the robot would actually act rather than what the screens would show. In the end, we end up with 10 solutions, at least, and we put them all up on the walls. The next thing we do is we try to make good decisions about what we're actually going to try. Again, no group voting. We're not like, oh, hey, what does everyone think of this idea? Everybody, how genius is my concept? One of the real dangers of designers is we're really good at talking about our design and convincing people that a shitty idea is actually a good idea. All the ideas have to stand on their own. So people walk around quietly again. There's no talking. We really discourage people from debating ideas and evaluate the concepts all on their own. The concept, because the person had enough time the day before, the concepts all have real text in them. There's no lorem ipsum. There's no like, here's a picture. It's a box with an X in it. Like, draw a picture. I don't care if you're Picasso or not. Draw like, is this mountains? Is this an informational graphic of a human doing something? Draw a stick figure. Make it make sense. And it means that we do this silly thing that looks like a bunch of consultancy crap, where we put little stickers next to all the good ideas. And this really helps people quietly kind of come together on the best ideas. And you see people gravitate towards things. And then we let the CEO or the head of product, kind of the most powerful person in the room, do super voting on the ideas that they want to see built. We're trying to replicate the power dynamic of a real organization. We don't want to fake their organization into some democracy that it's not. Because, say you're working with, I was working with Slack. The CEO of Slack, who's a good friend of mine, he is a very strong-headed person. He's very intelligent, very decisive. He's excellent. If he was the only person in the room who thought an idea was good, he would still come back to it and want to see it made. So in the end, when we were working with Slack, he voted on one idea that he was really passionate about, as well as the idea that everybody else had voted on, and we ended up prototyping both. You don't want to leave ideas on the floor that the powerful people in the room think are good. In the end, we tried a bunch of risky ideas. So these are the ideas that, the kinds of things that have been keeping them up at night. How do we knock on the door and make that experience great? This device, the robot doesn't have an articulating arm. It could bump up against the door. It could call into your room on the phone. We could have a human call your room on the phone. There's a whole bunch of ways we could potentially get in. We decided to give it sounds. They're a month and a half from launching, and they had never had the device actually make noises before. But somebody came up with the idea. I think it was Adrian, their audio engineer. He was like, listen, the actual thing has a speaker on it. We've never tried to use it before. I wonder if that would be delightful. One of the big risks, we gave it a face. We're like, OK, we are going to try a face, and we're going to see how people react to it. Then we gave it a bunch of dialogue. So the face had next to it things it was saying. And then we tried one really zany idea, is we made it dance. We're like, one person had this crazy idea during the day, and they're like, listen, I think if we do a great delivery and it's successful, the thing has 3 wheels under it, so it can turn on the spot. What if it just said, wee, and spun around in a circle? This is the kind of thing, I know it sounds silly, but this is the kind of thing that teams debate a lot. Because you'd be like, I don't know, it's so simple and basic, nobody would actually find that delightful. Or, I don't know, what if you're a business traveler and it just did a spin thing when it brought you a power converter for your laptop? Are you just going to think it's stupid and not serious enough? You debate these things, but we could actually go test this with real customers, right? And get some feedback about how do they actually react to the thing. All right, so we have 1 day left to actually make all of those things real on a robot. It doesn't sound like that much time, right? It sounds like we should be panicking. But the trick is we work at the right level of fidelity. We've already started from these really crappy sketches to an interface that looks real, even if it's on paper, right? That has real text that we're really going to put on the interface. And what we're really doing is just raising the level of fidelity on this thing. In this case, we just used Keynote. It was easy because then the PMs could even help us do the prototyping. You didn't need any skills in design software. So just use whatever tools work for you. Sometimes we even use things like Kinotopia. We're not reinventing buttons. I don't care if the buttons look production ready. They just got to look like buttons so customers think it's real. Adrian did the sound effects because he was into that. I designed all the interactions with my colleague John. For the robot choreography, for stuff like the dancing and the autonomous driving, we actually just drove it from around the corner using a PS3 controller. So instead of spending all the time programming to get it to do new behaviors, we just thought we'd fake them. As long as the customer can't see us, like as far as they're aware, it's autonomous. We're not going to invest the time in actually programming the thing until we know it's a good idea or not. We prototyped fairly long stories, so it's multi-screens. We wanted to see kind of if the customer would actually read the interface as it's talking. Did you get everything you wanted? We tested timing. So how long does the message have to be on the screen for us to know? We tested the screen they'd never had before, which is how did I do? Because this was the trigger for it to do the dance. But it's also the way that we measure longitudinally whether or not they're driving up the guest satisfaction index. Every time you order something in a hotel, they'll ask you, can I get you anything else? How did I do? They're secretly collecting the guest satisfaction index from you. We were like, oh, the robot can do that too. Like, that'd be great. And this is data we can report back to hotels and sell more robots. And then we did the dance. Yippee. Sorry, I'm skipping through this. A fairly complex interface for one day. We tried a bunch of face styles, kind of a dopey look, a fun look. We were trying to drive down people's expectations so they wouldn't think too much. We even tried a dog. That seemed too dopey to us. So we end up with kind of a Pokemon interface. And on Friday, we now tested this with real customers. So all of this, Monday to Thursday, is fairly useful. But in the end, if we weren't testing with real customers, we would still be BSing ourselves about whether or not any of these ideas are any good. Now, we've got a better sense from looking at them, but let's get this in front of real customers and see what happens. So remember I'm sorry, this is Michael. This is our researcher. So he actually did the studies this time. And as I said, we normally keep it really simple. Basic devices, usually. In this case, we were testing a robot in a hotel, and it can get a little bit more complicated. But we even did this in the same 5 days. So we went to the A-Loft. We want to test it in a real room. We took a lot of gear with us, a whole bunch of gear. Michael's a professional. He brings his gum. We set it all up. We taped up some cameras. We had one over the door so we could experience the actual interaction at the door. And at 9 a.m., our very first participant showed up. Keep in mind, they had been on Craigslist. They'd seen an ad that says, please come in. Michael made sure to include a line that says, I realize it's unusual to attend interviews in a hotel room. So they read Craigslist. They come in on a Friday morning to a hotel. There's a strange man waiting for them in the lobby. He asked them to come with him in the elevator to his hotel room. But Michael's a professional. He wore his Google badge and made sure to show it to them the minute they came in the front door. He maintained a respectable distance from the participants. He's good at this stuff. Meanwhile, the bunch of us are back at the office watching on the cameras, and we're taking notes. And what we're really looking for here is patterns of behavior. Having one exciting person come in and do something really unusual is really fun, and it's cool to tell stories about it later. But what you're really looking for is patterns of 3 or 4 people doing the same thing. Because that's the kind of stuff that will give you directional feedback for what might actually happen when you deploy this thing in the real world. And what happened is people loved it. It was really great. A whole bunch of the risky ideas worked out. We had even one guy, the way the behavior actually happened is we asked them, like Michael asked them some questions about kind of what staying in a hotel is normally like, and he's like, and what happens when you're in the hotel and you forget something like a toothbrush? And they described the normal process. And he goes, well, why don't you try it here? And they're like, what do you mean? He goes, well, just do what you normally do. And they call down to the front lobby, but it's really one of us on the phone. And we're like, oh, you forgot a toothbrush. No problem, sir. The robot will be up right away. And we'd hang up. And the person's like, looked really quizzical every time. And they're like, Michael's like, well, what's going to happen? He goes, well, I guess a robot's coming. And it was so useful for us because now we're asking them, well, what's going to happen when it gets here? And they were like, well, I guess it'll knock, but maybe it'll just call. And we're like, great, like that is how we were going to knock on the door, but that we knew what customers' expectations were like. And we have one guy, I swear to God, one guy got off the phone and he was like, they're like, okay, the robot will be right there, sir. And he hangs up the phone, walks over, picks up a remote, turns on the TV to ESPN. And Michael's like, so dude, what's going to happen? And he goes, robot's bringing my toothbrush. And we're like, only in Cupertino was that be like totally normal. But turns out, when we were recording things that worked, unusually, we nailed a lot of things. A whole bunch of the risky ideas worked. The delivery and handoff, which they had struggled with in the past, everybody got their toothbrush out of the device really easily. They actually thought things were exciting and delightful about the robot. They didn't expect the robot to be able to listen to them. None of them tried to talk to the robot. None of them wished the robot came across the threshold into the room. They're all happy with it being out there. They were happy that it had a personality and, in fact, wanted to know what to call it. And so we ended up putting a name badge on the robot. That's a really interesting challenge. We worked with them on this, is you can't call it like Bob or like give it a human name, or even like a Pat or something that's like a androgynous name. You have to like give it like a name like Relay, which is what we end up calling it, kind of these abstract names. Because if you call it like Pat, you walk into the lobby and there's 5 of them, and you're like, everyone's creeped out by 5 identical like humanoid-ish things. So we gave him a non-human name. And the really interesting part is we can get qualitative feedback from people. We were talking about whether or not this was better than having a person bring it to their room. And people really struggled with it. They were like, well, some parts are better. It's nice not to be able to tip the person. But it's also nice that it feels like a shitty task to ask a human to come all the way up to my room just to bring me a toothbrush. I feel like I put somebody out. And so they felt really good about that. But they were worried about robots taking people's jobs. And it was really a really healthy debate with them. And we understood kind of how customers might perceive a robot in this environment. Super, super helpful. Not every sprint has green all the way down the chart like this. Oftentimes we fail completely. So a sprint isn't to be successful. A sprint is to learn as quickly as you can. So even if it's all red down the chart and we failed a lot of stuff, we just saved ourselves weeks of engineering effort and operational effort to actually do something that likely wasn't going to work anyway. So, but it is fun when everything works. So this is just one example, and kind of an unusual one. We do this with a lot of other teams. As I was saying, we did one with Slack. I've done sprints with Medium. We've done sprints with a lot of, Slack, we did the out-of-box flow. So this is really interesting. So I could ramble up here all day. Slack, we were working with them on the onboarding flow because it's such a strange onboarding process that you sign up for a chat room product by yourself, and you end up in a chat room all by yourself. It's really hard to know whether or not it's any good or not, but it's really a big ask to ask somebody else to come into the chat room with you, let alone your workmates. And so we were trying to figure out how to get over that threshold as quickly as we could. We work with expert users all the time. People are harder to recruit than Craigslist. Developers, vacationers, geneticists. We even did one with truckers once, and we had to go to a truck stop and talk to truckers. All these things are possible. You just have to get creative, and it's a little bit more difficult. But the big things, and the reasons I'm really bullish about sprints, is you gather a great team of people together. Don't isolate yourself as a designer. Go work with engineers and PMs, people like your operations people like customer service. Go talk to your customer service team as much as you can. You'll learn a great deal from them. Give yourself time pressure. Don't overbuild a prototype because you'll fall in love with it and have a hard time receiving humiliating feedback or being humble in the face of feedback that might be humiliating. And then the real gold standard is to do quick, credible research. I mean, a lot of teams that do sprints and they cut off the research at the end because it was too hard or too time consuming, or they didn't have somebody who had research as their core expertise. As I was saying before, the only thing I've learned in a lot of years of designing is how to be wrong faster. And the best way to be wrong really fast is to get your product out in front of real customers and get credible evidence. As I was saying, a whole bunch of free articles at gve.com/sprint about how to do each element of this, as well as the book if you want. Go ahead, forth and prototype. I hope you're all successful with it. Thank you so much.